The boardroom doors swung open with a force that made the crystal chandeliers tremble. Every head turned as I walked in, my heels clicking against marble that cost more than most people's yearly salary. The hospital's board of directors sat frozen, their expensive suits suddenly looking cheap under the weight of what I was about to say. My mother's face went from confusion to recognition to something close to terror in the span of 3 heartbeats. She hadn't seen me in 16 years. 16 years since she made a choice that nearly destroyed me. 16 years since she chose a wedding over her daughter's life. Now here I stood, the owner of the very hospital where she'd built her precious career, and I had exactly 7 words that would shatter her world the way she'd once shattered mine. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The morning of Vanessa's wedding arrived with the kind of sunshine that photographers pray for. June lights spilled through the windows of our Hillcrest home, turning everything golden and soft. I was 16, still young enough to believe that family meant something unbreakable, still naive enough to think love came without conditions. My sister Vanessa had been planning this day for 18 months, and our mother Catherine had transformed into a woman possessed, obsessing over every detail from the shade of ivory in the napkins to the exact angle of each centerpiece rose. I stood in front of my bedroom mirror, smoothing down the bridesmaid dress that had required 3 fittings because mother insisted the hem had to break at precisely the right point on my ankle. The fabric was a pale lavender that Vanessa said brought out my eyes, though I suspected she'd chosen it because it photographed well. My dark hair had been curled and pinned by a stylist who'd arrived at dawn, and for once, I looked like I belonged in our family's carefully curated world of country club memberships and charity galas. My phone buzzed on the dresser. A text from my best friend Natasha asking if I was nervous about my speech at the reception. I'd spent weeks writing it, wanting to capture everything I felt about my sister without sounding too sentimental. Vanessa and I weren't particularly close. She was 8 years older, already finishing her master's degree in business while I was still figuring out what colleges I might want to visit. But she was my sister, and today felt important in a way I couldn't quite name. Mother's voice carried up the stairs, sharp and commanding even through closed doors. She was directing the catering staff, the florists, the wedding planner, conducting an orchestra of people whose job was to make this day perfect. Perfect. That word had defined our household for as long as I could remember. Perfect grades, perfect appearances, perfect behavior. Our father Richard went along with whatever mother decided, his own opinion smoothed away by years of marriage to a woman who knew exactly what she wanted and wouldn't accept anything less. The Riverside estate sat on a bluff overlooking the Willamette River, its manicured lawns rolling down toward the water like something from a movie. White chairs arranged in perfect rows faced an arch wrapped in roses and trailing greenery. A string quartet played softly as guests arrived in their summer finest, air-kissing and commenting on how beautiful everything looked. I watched from a window in the bridal suite as luxury cars filled the parking area, recognizing doctors from Mother's hospital, business associates of my father's, families we'd known since Vanessa and I were children. Vanessa stood before a full-length mirror, her wedding gown a masterpiece of lace and silk that had cost more than some cars. She looked radiant, her blonde hair swept up in an elaborate style that had taken 2 hours to create. Mother circled her like a sculptor examining a work in progress, adjusting a fold here, repositioning a pin there. Neither of them looked at me. I was part of the scenery today, necessary but not central to the narrative they were crafting. The ceremony went off without a flaw. Vanessa glided down the aisle on our father's arm while Mother dabbed at her eyes with a monogrammed handkerchief. Derek, the groom, looked appropriately emotional as he watched his bride approach. I stood with the other bridesmaids, holding my bouquet at exactly the right angle, smiling at exactly the right moments. The minister spoke about love and commitment and building a life together. The couple exchanged vows they'd written themselves, promising to support each other through whatever came. Everyone applauded. It was perfect, just like Mother had planned. The reception transformed the estate's ballroom into something from a dream. Chandeliers dripped with crystals that threw rainbow light across tables draped in champagne-colored linens. Each place setting included multiple forks and glasses, the kind of formal arrangement that always made me nervous about using the wrong utensil. A band set up on a raised stage, their equipment gleaming under carefully positioned spotlights. Servers in crisp uniforms moved through the crowd with trays of champagne and elaborate hors d'oeuvres. I found my assigned seat at a table near the dance floor, surrounded by cousins I barely knew and family friends who asked polite questions about school before turning to more interesting conversations with each other. Natasha wasn't here. Mother had deemed the wedding family only despite my protests, which apparently meant blood relatives and people who could advance our family's social standing but not my closest friend. I picked at my salad, watching Vanessa and Derek make their rounds, stopping at each table to accept congratulations and pose for photos. The speeches began after dinner. Derek's best man Trevor told stories about their college years that made everyone laugh. Mother stood and delivered remarks about watching her daughter grow into a beautiful woman, her voice catching in all the right places. My father raised his glass and welcomed Derek into the family with words that sounded rehearsed but sincere. Then it was my turn. I walked to the microphone on legs that felt steadier than I'd expected. The spotlight found me, warm and exposing. I unfolded the paper where I'd written my speech, my hands only slightly trembling. I began talking about what it was like growing up with a sister so much older, how Vanessa had seemed almost mythical to me as a child, this sophisticated presence who came home from college with stories of a world I couldn't wait to enter. I talked about the time she'd helped me with a science project when I was 10, staying up past midnight to build a model of the solar system even though she had exams the next day. I mentioned how she'd driven me to my first day of high school when our parents were traveling, giving me advice about navigating the social complexities of a new school. The audience was attentive, some people smiling at the anecdotes. Vanessa watched me with an expression I couldn't quite read, something between appreciation and impatience. I was nearing the end of my speech, about to deliver the closing line I'd polished until it shone, when someone's phone rang, the sound piercing through the carefully maintained atmosphere. Mother's face went rigid with disapproval. Phones were supposed to be silenced during the reception. This was exactly the kind of disruption she'd spent months trying to prevent. But then I saw her expression change as she glanced at her own phone lying beside her plate. She picked it up, her thumb moving across the screen. Her posture shifted from irritation to alertness. I kept talking, pushing through the distraction, but I noticed other people checking their phones now. A murmur rippled through the crowd, starting at the back tables and moving forward like a wave. Something was happening. Something outside this perfect bubble we'd created. I finished my speech to scattered applause that felt half-hearted, people's attention already fragmenting. Vanessa stood to hug me, but her smile was tight, annoyed at whatever was pulling focus from her celebration. I returned to my seat, confused by the sudden shift in energy. My cousin across the table leaned toward me, his phone screen glowing. "There's been an accident on the highway," he said quietly. "Major pileup. They're saying dozens of vehicles involved." My stomach tightened. The highway he meant was Interstate 5, the main route through Portland. It was the road most of the guests would take when leaving tonight. My father was already standing, making his way toward Mother, his phone pressed to his ear. I watched them confer, saw Mother's jaw set in that way it did when she was making a decision she didn't like but felt was necessary. The band started playing again, attempting to restore the celebratory mood. Derek led Vanessa onto the dance floor for their first dance, and gradually the room's attention returned to the couple swaying under the lights. But I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling spreading through my chest. I excused myself from the table, needing air, needing space away from the forced gaiety. The estate's garden stretched behind the building, paths winding between beds of roses and hydrangeas. The June evening had cooled slightly, and I wrapped my arms around myself as I walked, my heels sinking slightly into grass still damp from the groundskeeper's earlier watering. Music drifted from the ballroom, muted by distance and walls. Out here I could breathe, could let my face relax from the smile I'd been holding all day. I thought about my speech, about the stories I'd told of Vanessa. They were true, but they were also incomplete. I hadn't mentioned the time she'd snapped at me for bothering her, or the way she'd looked at me sometimes like I was an inconvenience she'd been forced to tolerate. I hadn't talked about how Mother clearly favored her, the accomplished older daughter who'd followed the path laid out for her without deviation, while I was still trying to figure out who I wanted to be beyond my family's expectations. Voices carried from the parking area, urgent and overlapping. I moved toward the sound, curiosity pulling me down a side path that led to where the cars were parked. A cluster of guests stood near the valet station, all staring at their phones, their faces lit by the screen's glow. An older man I recognized as one of my father's business partners was talking rapidly into his phone. "They're asking for doctors," he was saying. "Anyone with medical training to respond to the scene." My mother was a doctor, head of cardiology at Mercy General Hospital. She'd built her career through relentless focus and political savvy, becoming one of the youngest department heads in the hospital's history. Medicine was her identity beyond motherhood, beyond marriage. It was the thing that made her feel powerful and necessary. I saw her then, striding across the parking lot toward her car, still in her formal dress but moving with purpose. My father trailed behind her, trying to keep up, his hand outstretched as if to stop her. I moved closer, staying in the shadows where they wouldn't notice me. "Catherine, you can't leave," my father was saying. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. This is Vanessa's wedding. You're the mother of the bride. People are dying, Richard. My mother's voice was cold and clinical. The hospital is calling in all available staff. This is what I trained for. What about your daughter? What about your family? My mother stopped, turned to face him. Her expression in the parking lot lights looked carved from stone. Vanessa is married now. The ceremony is done. She has Derek. She doesn't need me standing around eating cake when I could be saving lives. I pressed back against a decorative pillar, my heart hammering. I'd always known mother's work came first, but hearing her dismiss Vanessa's wedding so easily felt brutal even to me. My father tried to argue, but mother was already getting into her car, the door closing with a solid thunk that ended the conversation. Other cars were starting to leave too, a stream of departures as people made excuses and headed out. The accident had fractured the celebration, letting reality leak in through the cracks. I walked back toward the ballroom, feeling hollow. Inside, Vanessa was still dancing, her dress swirling around her legs, her face flushed and happy. She didn't know yet that half her guests were leaving, that mother had already gone. I found Marcus, my 13-year-old brother, sitting alone at a table near the back, playing a game on his phone. He looked up as I approached, his face illuminated by the screen's glow. "Did you see Mom leave?" he asked. I nodded, sliding into the chair next to him. "She got called to the hospital." He made a sound that might have been a laugh or a sigh. "Of course she did. It's always the hospital." We sat in silence, watching our sister spin across the dance floor with her new husband, watching our father stand at the edge of the crowd with a drink in his hand and defeat in his shoulders, watching the careful perfection of the day slowly unravel despite everyone's best efforts to hold it together. The cake cutting happened around 9. Vanessa and Derek posed with the ornate knife, feeding each other bites while photographers snapped away. Toasts continued, becoming looser and more emotional as the alcohol flowed. The band played louder, trying to compensate for the thinning crowd. I danced with my father during the father-daughter dance, his hand heavy on my shoulder, neither of us speaking. Around 10:30, I told my father I wasn't feeling well and asked if I could head home early. He looked relieved to have something to do, someone to take care of. He handed me the keys to his car, told me to drive carefully, kissed my forehead in the distracted way he had when his mind was elsewhere. Marcus wanted to come too, tired of being ignored at a party full of adults, so we left together, slipping out through a side door while Vanessa was occupied on the dance floor. The night had turned cool, and I shivered in my thin bridesmaid dress as we walked across the parking lot. Marcus complained about being hungry despite the elaborate dinner, typical teenage boy always needing food. I told him we'd stop somewhere on the way home, maybe hit a drive-through for burgers. He perked up at that, already listing what he wanted to order. I adjusted the driver's seat, checked the mirrors, backed carefully out of the parking space. My father's car was larger than what I was used to driving, but I had my license and I'd driven to school and back plenty of times. The estate's long driveway curved down toward the main road, trees on either side blocking the view until you reached the bottom. "We need to take River Road to get to the highway," Marcus said, looking at his phone. "There's an alternate route that avoids the accident site." I followed his directions, turning right out of the estate onto a 2-lane road that wound along the bluff above the river. It was darker here, fewer streetlights, the road illuminated mainly by my headlights cutting through the gloom. The music from the wedding faded behind us until there was only the hum of the engine and the whisper of tires on asphalt. Marcus was telling me about something that happened at school, some drama involving his friends that seemed important to him. I was only half listening, my attention on the road and the nagging thought of Mother leaving the wedding without a word to Vanessa. It was so typical of her, so perfectly in character, and yet it made me sad in a way I couldn't fully articulate. The deer appeared without warning, its eyes reflecting my headlights like twin coins in the darkness. It stood in the middle of my lane, frozen by fear or confusion. I jerked the wheel left, an instinctive reaction that happened faster than thought. The car swerved. I felt the tires lose their grip on the road. Marcus shouted something. Time seemed to slow and speed up simultaneously. The guardrail rushed toward us, metal gleaming. Impact shook through the vehicle like an earthquake, the sound of it huge and terrible. Glass exploded inward. The world tilted sideways, and then we were rolling, the car tumbling down the embankment toward the river below. Each rotation was a chaos of noise and motion and objects becoming projectiles. I tried to shield my face, my arms moving on their own. Something heavy struck my leg, and pain detonated through my body in a white-hot flash that drove everything else away. Then stillness. The car had stopped moving, resting at an angle I couldn't fully comprehend. Steam hissed from the engine. My ears rang so loudly I couldn't hear anything else. I tried to move and gasped at the agony that shot through my left leg. In the dim light from the dashboard, I could see it bent at an angle that was completely wrong, bone visible through torn skin and fabric. Blood was spreading across my dress, turning the pale lavender dark. Marcus groaned somewhere to my right. I turned my head, moving slowly through the molasses of shock. He was slumped against his door, blood running from a cut on his forehead, but he was conscious, his eyes open and wide with fear. "Tori," he whispered. "Are you okay?" I tried to answer but couldn't find my voice. The pain in my leg was overwhelming, a living thing that wanted to consume me. I fumbled for my phone, found it somehow still in the small purse I'd carried, the screen cracked but functioning. My fingers were clumsy, shaking so hard I could barely hold it. I managed to dial 911, managed to give them our location when the operator answered, managed to say we'd crashed and we needed help before the phone slipped from my grip. Time became strange after that, stretching and compressing. Marcus was crying, calling my name. I wanted to comfort him but the pain was too big, leaving no room for words. Sirens eventually wailed in the distance, growing closer. Red and blue lights painted the wreckage. Voices shouted. Hands reached through the broken window, touching me, telling me to stay still, telling me help was here. They extracted Marcus first, his injuries less severe. I heard him protesting, saying he wouldn't leave me, heard someone gently but firmly telling him he needed to get checked out. Then it was my turn. The firefighters had to cut away part of the car to reach me, the metal screaming as they worked. When they finally pulled me free, the movement sent fresh waves of agony through my leg. I screamed, couldn't help it, the sound torn from somewhere deep inside. The ambulance ride was a blur of fluorescent lights and urgent voices. A paramedic worked over me, starting in 4, checking my vitals, asking me questions I couldn't focus enough to answer properly. He kept talking about my leg, words like compound fracture and possible nerve damage floating past me like debris in a current. I fixed my eyes on the ambulance ceiling, trying to find something steady to anchor to while my body shook and my teeth chattered despite the blanket someone had draped over me. We arrived at Mercy General Hospital, the same place where my mother worked, though I didn't fully register that connection through the haze of pain and shock. They wheeled me through automatic doors that whispered open, down corridors bright enough to hurt my eyes, into an emergency bay where more people surrounded me. Someone cut away what remained of my bridesmaid dress. Hands probed my leg with a gentleness that still made me want to scream. A doctor whose face I couldn't quite focus on spoke about x-rays and surgery and stabilization. "I need to call my parents," I managed to say, the words slurring together. "We're contacting them now," a nurse assured me, her voice kind. "Just try to stay calm." But calm was impossible. The pain had moved beyond physical sensation into something existential, something that made me question whether anything beyond this moment was real. They injected something into my fore, and the edges of the world went soft and distant. Voices became echoes. The ceiling tiles swam above me like clouds. Somewhere far away, someone was wheeling me down another corridor, through more doors, into a room that smelled of antiseptic and fear. "Where's my mother?" I heard myself ask, the words floating out of me. "I need my mother." No one answered, or if they did, I couldn't hear them anymore. The medication was pulling me down into darkness, and I let it take me, grateful to escape the pain even if just for a little while. My last coherent thought was of Vanessa in her wedding dress, spinning across that ballroom floor, perfect and untouchable, while I bled out in a hospital where our mother worked but wasn't there to save me. The darkness swallowed me whole, and for a blessed span of time, there was nothing at all. I woke to whiteness and the steady beep of machines. My mouth felt stuffed with cotton, my head thick and slow. For a moment I couldn't remember where I was or why everything hurt. Then awareness crept back in fragments. The deer. The guardrail. Marcus screaming. My leg twisted at that horrible angle. The pain that had felt like dying. I tried to sit up and immediately regretted it. My entire left side erupted in protest, the sensation sharp enough to steal my breath. A hand pressed gently against my shoulder, easing me back down. "Easy there." The voice belonged to a nurse whose name tag read Grace Wu. "You've been through quite an ordeal. Let's not rush things." My throat was raw when I spoke. "What happened? Where's my brother?" "Your brother is fine. Minor concussion, some cuts and bruises, but he's already been released to your father. You, on the other hand, had a more complicated night." The memories were solidifying now, becoming more concrete and terrible. My leg. I shifted under the thin hospital blanket, trying to see, and felt the heavy weight of a cast encasing my left side from hip to ankle. Panic fluttered in my chest like a trapped bird. "My leg," I whispered. Grace's expression softened with practiced sympathy. "You sustained a compound fracture of your femur, along with damage to your tibia and fibula. The surgeon was able to set the bones and insert a rod to stabilize everything, but it was extensive trauma. You're going to need significant recovery time." The surgeon. The word caught in my foggy brain. "Where's my mother?" "She works here. Dr. Catherine Hayes, cardiology." "Did anyone tell her?" Something flickered across Grace's face, there and gone so quickly I might have imagined it. "Your father has been notified. He's on his way." That wasn't what I'd asked, but before I could press further, the door opened and my father walked in. He looked like he'd aged a decade overnight, his tuxedo shirt wrinkled and untucked, his bow tie hanging loose around his neck. His eyes were red-rimmed, whether from crying or exhaustion I couldn't tell. "Torai." His voice cracked on my name. He crossed to my bedside in 3 strides, his hand finding mine and gripping it so tightly it almost hurt. "Thank God." When they called, when they said there'd been an accident, I thought. He couldn't finish the sentence. I squeezed his hand back, my own eyes burning. "Where's Mom?" I asked again. "Is she coming?" My father's face did something complicated, muscles twitching as if he couldn't decide which expression to settle on. He glanced at Grace, who busied herself checking my fore. "Your mother is dealing with the patients from the highway accident," he said finally. "The emergency room has been overwhelmed all night. She's been in surgery. But I'm her daughter." The words came out smaller than I intended, almost childlike. "I'm her daughter and I'm hurt." "I know, sweetheart." My father's voice gentled. "I know. She'll come as soon as she can." Except she didn't come. Not that morning when the anesthesia fully wore off and the pain crashed over me in waves that made me sob into my pillow. Not that afternoon when a physical therapist came to explain the long road ahead of me, the months of rehabilitation I'd need, the possibility that I might walk with a permanent limp. Not that evening when they brought me a dinner tray I couldn't stomach, when every small movement sent lightning bolts of agony through my reconstructed leg. My father stayed, sleeping in the uncomfortable chair beside my bed, jumping up every time I made a sound. Marcus came to visit, his forehead bandaged, guilt written all over his young face even though none of this was his fault. Vanessa appeared briefly, still in her honeymoon glow, though she'd cut the trip short when she heard about the accident. She perched on the edge of my bed for maybe 10 minutes, making sympathetic noises while checking her phone, before Derek appeared in the doorway and reminded her they had a flight to catch for their rescheduled honeymoon. "I'm so sorry this happened, Tori," Vanessa said, squeezing my hand in a way that felt performative. "But you're going to be fine. You're young. You'll heal fast." She left in a cloud of expensive perfume, and I was alone again except for my father, who'd stepped out to make phone calls. The hospital room felt like a cage, for walls closing in around me while machines beeped their monotonous rhythm and the fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Through the window I could see a slice of Portland sky, gray clouds moving across pale blue. The world was continuing out there, people going about their lives while I lay trapped in this bed with my shattered leg and my absent mother. The surgeon came by that evening during his rounds. Dr. Leonard Park was older, maybe in his 60s, with steel gray hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He pulled up a stool and spoke to me like I was an adult, not a child to be placated with half-truths. "Victoria, I'm not going to sugarcoat this. The damage to your leg was severe. We've done everything we can surgically, but you're facing a minimum of 6 months of intensive physical therapy, possibly longer. There's nerve damage that may or may not fully heal. You might regain complete function, or you might have permanent limitations. It's too early to say definitively." His honesty was almost refreshing after everyone else's careful optimism. I appreciated that he wasn't lying to me, wasn't pretending this was just a bump in the road I'd easily overcome. "Can I ask you something?" I said. "Of course. My mother works here. Dr. Catherine Hayes. Did she know about my surgery? About how bad it was?" Dr. Park's expression shifted, something like discomfort crossing his features. He adjusted his glasses, a gesture that felt like buying time. "I'm sure your mother has been kept informed of your condition," he said carefully. "That's not what I asked." He held my gaze for a long moment, and I saw the decision happen behind his eyes, the choice to tell me the truth or protect me from it. He chose truth. "Yes," he said quietly. "She knew. She was here in the hospital when you were brought in. She was informed of the extent of your injuries and the need for immediate surgery." The room tilted slightly, my vision tunneling. "And she didn't come." It wasn't a question, but he answered anyway. "She made a choice to prioritize the patients from the highway accident. There were multiple critical cases, people who would have died without immediate intervention. Your surgery, while serious, was not immediately life-threatening once you were stabilized. So I wasn't dying enough." The bitterness in my voice surprised even me. I wasn't important enough to pull her away from strangers. Dr. Park leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "Listen to me, Victoria. What your mother did, the choice she made, that's between you and her. But I want you to understand something. You have a long recovery ahead of you. Anger and resentment are going to make that recovery harder. I've seen it happen. Patients who can't let go of their anger at the universe, at the drunk driver who hit them, at the circumstances that led to their injury, they struggle more. Their bodies heal slower. Pain becomes chronic because they hold on to it emotionally as well as physically. Are you telling me not to be angry at my mother? I'm telling you to be strategic about where you put your energy. Channel it into your recovery. Prove everyone wrong about what you can achieve. That's the best revenge there is." His words settled into me, planting seeds that wouldn't sprout for years but were already taking root. He stood, patted my shoulder with a gentleness that made my throat tight, and left me alone with my thoughts and my pain and my growing understanding that my mother had chosen her career over me in the most literal way possible. She came the next day, finally, when I'd been moved out of the ICU and into a regular room. I was dozing when I heard the door open, dragged up from uneasy dreams by the sound of her heels clicking across the linoleum. I opened my eyes to find her standing at the foot of my bed, still in her white coat with her stethoscope draped around her neck like a talisman of her importance. Victoria. Her voice was clipped, professional, the same tone she used with her residents. How are you feeling? Not an apology. Not an explanation. Just a clinical inquiry about my status. How am I feeling? I repeated, my own voice flat. I'm feeling like my mother didn't care enough to be here when I needed her. Her jaw tightened. That's not fair. I was saving lives. The emergency room was in crisis. I had patients coding on tables. I had to make difficult choices about resource allocation. I'm your daughter. I wanted to scream it, but it came out as barely more than a whisper. I was in surgery. I could have died. But you didn't. You were in capable hands. Dr. Park is an excellent surgeon. You received the best possible care. From a stranger. Not from my mother. She crossed her arms, her posture defensive. I don't expect you to understand the pressures of working in emergency medicine. When there's a mass casualty event, every doctor has to make choices about where they can do the most good. I had critical patients who would have died without my immediate intervention. Your surgery was important, but it wasn't an emergency in the same way. So you're saying I wasn't worth your time? That's not what I said. It's what you did. The tears were coming now, hot and angry. You left Vanessa's wedding to go save strangers, which fine, I get it, that's your job. But then when your own daughter, your own child, is brought into your hospital with bones sticking out of her leg, you can't even stop by to hold her hand? You can't take 5 minutes to be a mother instead of a doctor? Catherine's face hardened into the expression I knew well, the one that meant she decided I was being unreasonable and she was done engaging. This is exactly the kind of emotional manipulation I don't have time for. You're alive. You're going to recover. I'm sorry you don't approve of my choices, but I stand by them. I did what needed to be done. She turned toward the door. Don't walk away from me, I said, my voice rising. For once in my life, don't just walk away when things get uncomfortable. She paused, her hand on the door handle, but she didn't turn around. I have patients to see, she said. I'll check on you later. The door closed behind her with a soft click that felt louder than a slam. I stared at the space where she'd been standing, my chest heaving with fury and hurt so tangled together I couldn't separate them. My father appeared moments later, his face drawn. I heard raised voices, he said carefully. Are you okay? No. I wasn't okay. I wasn't sure I'd ever be okay again. She doesn't care, Dad. She really doesn't care about anyone but herself and her precious career. He sighed, sitting in the chair he'd barely left since the accident. Your mother is complicated, Tori. She loves you in her way, but her work, it's who she is. It's not an excuse, but it's the truth. Her way isn't enough. The words felt like something breaking loose inside me, a truth I'd known but never voiced. I'm 16 years old and I just learned that my mother's love has conditions. That I have to be dying in the right way to earn her attention. My father had no answer for that. He just reached for my hand and held it while I cried, the tears soaking into my pillow, my body shaking with sobs that made my legs scream in protest. Somewhere in the hospital, my mother was making her rounds, checking charts, consulting with colleagues, being the brilliant Dr. Catherine Hayes that everyone admired. And I was just her daughter, the one who hadn't been important enough. The days blurred into weeks. Physical therapy started while I was still in the hospital, brutal sessions where therapists pushed me to move my leg in ways that felt impossible. Every exercise was agony. Every attempt to bear weight sent lightning through my bones. I gritted my teeth and did it anyway, driven by something I couldn't quite name yet, but that felt like defiance taking shape. My mother came by occasionally, her visits perfunctory and brief. She'd review my chart with the nurses, ask technical questions about my healing progress, maybe spend 5 minutes by my bedside before being paged away to something more important. She never apologized. Never acknowledged that she'd made a choice that hurt me. In her mind, she'd done the right thing, the logical thing, and my feelings about it were an unfortunate complication she didn't have the bandwidth to address. Dr. Park, though, became an unexpected presence in my recovery. He checked on me daily, even after his surgical responsibilities were complete. He'd pull up a stool and talk to me about things beyond my injury. He asked about school, about my interests, about what I wanted to do with my life. I told him I'd been thinking about pre-med, maybe following in my mother's footsteps, but now I wasn't sure. Why not? He asked. Because I don't want to become like her. Cold. Detached. Choosing work over the people who need me. He considered this carefully. Medicine doesn't have to make you cold, Victoria. Some doctors lose their empathy along the way, it's true. The work is hard, the hours are brutal, the stakes are life and death. It takes a toll. But some doctors manage to hold on to their humanity. They remember that patients aren't just cases to be solved, they're people with families and fears and hopes. You could be that kind of doctor. How do you not become bitter? I asked. When you see so much suffering, how do you not just shut down? You find meaning in the small victories. The patient who walks again when everyone said they wouldn't. The person whose life you save with a decision made in seconds. The moment when you explain something in a way that finally makes sense and you see the fear leave someone's eyes. Those moments, they sustain you. His words planted something in me, another seed joining the ones from our earlier conversation. I started watching the hospital differently after that. Observing the nurses who treated patients with dignity, the orderlies who took time to chat with lonely patients, the therapists who celebrated tiny improvements like they were Olympic gold medals. I saw that it was possible to work in medicine without losing your soul. You just had to choose it, every day, in small ways and large. Natasha visited as often as she could, sneaking in outside visiting hours when the nurses looked the other way. She brought me gossip from school, updates on the friends I was missing, magazines and books to break up the monotony. She didn't treat me like I was fragile or damaged. She made inappropriate jokes about hospital food and flirted shamelessly with the young residents, making me laugh until my side hurt. Your mom is a piece of work, she said one afternoon, sprawled in the visitor chair with her feet propped on my bed. Everyone at school is talking about how she wasn't there for your surgery. My mom would have burned the hospital down if they tried to keep her away from me. I don't want to talk about her, I said, but I was grateful that someone else saw it, that I wasn't crazy for being hurt by my mother's absence. When are they springing you from this place? Another week, maybe 2. Then home for more physical therapy. Home. The word felt complicated. Going back to a house where my mother lived, where I'd have to see her every day and feel the weight of her indifference, it didn't feel like going home. It felt like returning to a battlefield where I'd already lost. The day I was finally discharged, 6 weeks after the accident, my father pulled the car up to the hospital entrance and a nurse wheeled me out in a wheelchair. I'd graduated to crutches but couldn't manage them for long distances yet. The summer sunshine felt shocking after so much time under fluorescent lights. The air smelled like roses and car exhaust and freedom. Dr. Park came down to see me off. He handed me a card with his personal number written on the back. I don't usually do this, he said, but I want you to call me if you need anything. Not medical emergencies, you've got doctors for that. But if you need someone to talk to, someone who understands what it's like to navigate this world when your body has betrayed you, I'm here. Thank you. The words felt inadequate for everything he'd done, the way he'd treated me like a person instead of a problem. I clutched the card like a lifeline. At home, my mother had converted the downstairs study into a temporary bedroom for me since I couldn't manage stairs yet. She'd done it efficiently, moving furniture and setting up the space with the same clinical precision she applied to everything. When I arrived, she was at work. Of course she was at work. Marcus helped me settle in, arranging my books and laptop within reach, making sure I had water and snacks nearby. He'd been different since the accident, quieter, more attentive. Guilt had changed him, made him hyper-aware of my needs even though I kept telling him it wasn't his fault. The physical therapy continued 3 times a week at an outpatient facility. It was grueling work, pushing my body to remember how to move, how to bear weight, how to walk without the crutches that had become extensions of my arms. Some days I made progress. Other days I felt like I was sliding backward, the pain too intense, the task too impossible. My mother and I existed in the same house but barely spoke. She left for the hospital before I woke and came home after I'd gone to bed. When we did cross paths, our conversations were stilted and surface level. She never asked how therapy was going. Never asked how I was coping emotionally with the trauma of the accident and its aftermath. She existed in her bubble of work and I existed in my world of recovery, and the space between us grew wider with each passing day. Vanessa returned from her honeymoon tan and glowing. She visited once, sitting in the living room while I hobbled in on my crutches. She talked about Bali, about the resort where they'd stayed, about Derek's romantic gestures and the perfect sunset dinners. She asked about my leg in that vague way people do when they don't really want details. It must be so hard, she said, her eyes drifting to her phone. But at least it happened after the wedding. Can you imagine if you'd crashed on the way to the ceremony? That would have been a disaster. I stared at her, waiting for her to realize what she'd just said, waiting for the awareness to dawn that she'd essentially told me my injury's only silver lining was that it hadn't inconvenienced her special day. But she just smiled, oblivious, and launched into a story about the couple they'd met at the resort. When she left, I sat in the study that had become my room and cried. Not from pain, though my leg ached constantly. From loneliness. From the realization that my family, the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally, saw me as secondary to their own concerns. My mother's career. Vanessa's wedding. Even my father's desire to keep the peace. I was always going to come second, third, fourth. I was never going to be the priority. That night, I took out Dr. Park's card and stared at the number he'd written. My thumb hovered over my phone, wanting to call but not sure what I'd say. What could he do, really? He couldn't change my family. He couldn't make my mother care. But his words echoed in my head, about channeling anger into recovery, about proving everyone wrong. I didn't call him that night. Instead, I opened my laptop and started researching. Medical schools. Orthopedic surgery programs. Success stories of people who'd overcome devastating injuries to achieve remarkable things. I read until my eyes burned and my leg throbbed, its incessant reminder of everything I'd lost and everything I had yet to prove. Somewhere in the hospital across town, my mother was probably still working, still saving lives, still being the hero everyone thought she was. And here I was, her daughter, learning that sometimes the people closest to you can be the furthest away. Learning that love could be conditional and attention could be earned only through crisis. Learning that if I wanted to matter, if I wanted to be seen, I'd have to build a life so undeniable that even she couldn't ignore it. The anger that Dr. Park had warned me about, it didn't go away. But it did transform. It became fuel. It became purpose. It became the thing that got me through the next excruciating physical therapy session and the one after that and the one after that. Every time I wanted to quit, every time the pain felt like too much, I thought about my mother choosing strangers over me. I thought about Vanessa's relief that my accident hadn't ruined her wedding. I thought about being invisible in my own family. And I pushed harder. By the end of summer, I was walking without crutches, though I still limped and probably always would. The doctors said I'd beaten their expectations, that my recovery was remarkable for the severity of the injury. I knew it wasn't remarkable. It was rage given form, transformed into determination through sheer force of will. School started and I threw myself into academics with an intensity that surprised my teachers and worried my father. I stopped trying to get my mother's attention. Stopped hoping she'd notice my progress or acknowledge what I'd overcome. I redirected all that wasted emotional energy into building the version of myself that would eventually walk into a boardroom and say 7 words that would shatter her world the way she'd once shattered mine. I didn't know yet what those words would be. Didn't know the path that would lead me there. But I knew with absolute certainty that someday, somehow, I would make her see me. Make her regret the choice she'd made that night when she decided saving strangers was more important than being there for her daughter. The seeds Dr. Park had planted were taking root, pushing up through the hard soil of my anger and hurt, reaching toward a light I couldn't quite see yet but knew was there, waiting for me to grow tall enough to reach it. Senior year arrived with the weight of decisions I wasn't ready to make. College applications loomed, each one a declaration of who I planned to become. My guidance counselor kept pushing me towards state schools, places close to home where I could commute if my leg gave me trouble. Safe choices. Predictable paths. Everything I'd spent the last year learning to hate. I applied to Stanford, MIT, Johns Hopkins, schools so far out of reach they felt like fantasies. My grades were exceptional, they always had been, but now they carried the sharpness of purpose behind them. Every perfect score was a middle finger to the universe that had tried to break me. Every award was proof that I'd survived something that should have destroyed my future. The limp never fully disappeared. On cold days or after too much walking, my leg ached with a persistence that reminded me of guardrails and shattered glass. Physical therapy had done what it could, but Dr. Park's warning about permanent limitations had proven accurate. I walked differently now, moved differently, existed in my body with a constant awareness of its fragility and its strength in equal measure. My mother noticed my college application list when the acceptance letters started arriving in spring. She came home early one Thursday, an occurrence so rare that Marcus actually looked up from his video game in surprise. She found me in the kitchen going through my mail, and her eyes landed on the Stanford envelope I just opened. "Stanford," she said, picking it up without asking permission. "That's quite far from Portland." "That's the point," I replied, taking it back from her hands. "We need to discuss this rationally. The financial burden of out-of-state tuition, the practical considerations of your mobility limitations, the question of whether you're ready to be that far from your support system." My support system. The words almost made me laugh. "You mean the family that wasn't there when I actually needed support?" Her mouth tightened into that familiar line of disapproval. "You're still angry about the accident. I understand that, but you can't make major life decisions based on teenage resentment." "Watch me," I said, and walked out of the kitchen, my limp more pronounced because I was tired and my leg hurt and I didn't care about hiding weakness from her anymore. My father tried to mediate, as he always did, suggesting compromises that would satisfy no one. "What if you went to University of Oregon? It's an excellent school and you could come home on weekends. Or Portland State, you could live at home and save money." But I didn't want to save money or come home on weekends or stay in the orbit of a mother who'd proven I would never be her priority. I wanted to build something so far removed from her world that she couldn't touch it, couldn't diminish it, couldn't make me feel small by her mere presence. Dr. Park, who I'd stayed in touch with through occasional coffee meetings that felt like mentorship, had a different perspective when I told him about the college debate. "Where do you want to go?" he asked simply. "Stanford." The word came out with certainty I felt in my bones. "They have an incredible bioengineering program. I want to study how the body heals, how we can make prosthetics and implants that actually improve people's lives instead of just replacing what they lost." "Then go to Stanford," he said. "Don't let anyone else's fear or guilt dictate your path. My mother will never forgive me for leaving." He stirred his coffee slowly, choosing his words with care. "Your mother's forgiveness isn't something you should be chasing, Victoria. You can't heal a relationship where only one person acknowledges there's a wound. Maybe distance is exactly what you both need." His permission, or maybe just his acknowledgement that I wasn't crazy for wanting to leave, unlocked something in me. I accepted Stanford's offer. I applied for every scholarship I could find, took out loans for what the financial aid didn't cover, and started counting down the days until I could leave Portland behind. Graduation came with its obligatory ceremonies and forced smiles for photographs. My mother showed up, naturally, because not attending would have looked bad to the other parents, to her colleagues whose children were also graduating. She stood beside me in pictures, her hand on my shoulder, performing the role of proud mother while I performed the role of grateful daughter. Vanessa and Derek came, though Vanessa spent most of the ceremony on her phone dealing with some work crisis. Marcus was the only one who seemed genuinely happy for me, who hugged me afterward and told me he was going to miss me. That summer passed in a strange suspension between worlds. I worked part-time at a medical supply company, saving money for California. I went through more physical therapy to strengthen my leg for all the walking I'd be doing on campus. I packed and repacked my belongings, trying to fit a whole life into the boxes and suitcases that would travel with me. My mother and I maintained our careful distance, circling each other in the house like planets in separate orbits. She worked her long hours. I worked my shorter ones and spent my free time researching my upcoming classes, familiarizing myself with the Stanford campus through virtual tours, imagining the person I'd become once I got there. The night before I left, my father took me to dinner at my favorite restaurant, just the two of us. He talked about his own college experience, about the fear and excitement of leaving home, about how proud he was of everything I'd accomplished. He didn't mention my mother until dessert arrived. "She does love you, you know," he said quietly. "She's just never learned how to show it in a way that doesn't involve fixing things or solving problems." "I love her too," I said, and I meant it despite everything. "But I can't keep breaking myself open hoping she'll finally see inside and care about what she finds. I have to go build a life where I matter to myself, even if I never matter enough to her." My father's eyes went glassy. He reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "You've always mattered, Tori. Don't forget that." But I had forgotten it, somewhere between the accident and the aftermath, between the empty hospital room and the even emptier conversations with my mother. I'd forgotten that I had value beyond what I could achieve or prove or become. Going to Stanford wasn't just about education. It was about remembering. The drive to California took 2 days. My father insisted on taking me himself, packing my entire life into his SUV and driving down Interstate 5 with me riding shotgun. We listened to music and podcasts and long stretches of comfortable silence. We stopped at roadside diners and cheap motels. For those 2 days, I felt like I had a parent who saw me, who cared about my interior life beyond just my accomplishments. Stanford's campus was everything I'd imagined and more. Palm trees and red tile roofs and students who moved with the confidence of people who believed they were going to change the world. My dorm room was small but mine, a space where no one knew about the accident or the limp or the mother who'd chosen wrong. I could reinvent myself here, become whoever I decided to be. My father helped me unpack, offering unsolicited advice about studying and sleep schedules and remembering to call home. When it was time for him to leave, we stood in the parking lot and he pulled me into a hug that lasted longer than usual. "Make us proud," he whispered into my hair. "I'm doing this for me, Dad. Not for you or Mom or anyone else. Just me." He pulled back, smiling despite the tears on his cheeks. "Even better," he said. I watched him drive away, his taillights disappearing into California traffic, and felt the first real breath of freedom I'd experienced in 2 years. No more walking on eggshells around my mother's schedule. No more measuring my words to avoid conflict. No more living in the shadow of her choices and their consequences. Just me and the future I was about to build. The coursework was brutal. Stanford didn't coddle anyone, didn't make exceptions for students still recovering from traumatic injuries. I struggled initially, my leg aching from the constant walking between classes, my brain overwhelmed by the sheer volume of information we were expected to absorb and synthesize. I thought about calling Dr. Park multiple times during those first few weeks, desperate for reassurance that I hadn't made a terrible mistake. Instead, I went to office hours. I formed study groups with other students who were equally terrified and determined. I learned to use the campus shuttle system to save my leg on bad days. I discovered that disability services could provide accommodations without pity, that asking for help didn't mean admitting defeat. Slowly, painfully, I found my footing. My roommate Natasha, different from my high school friend but equally bold, became my anchor in those first months. She was studying computer science with a minor in philosophy, a combination she insisted made perfect sense because both were about understanding systems and finding elegant solutions. She asked about my limp once, early on, and accepted my abbreviated explanation without pressing for details. After that, she just treated me like anyone else, which was exactly what I needed. I called home occasionally, brief conversations where my father asked about classes and Marcus complained about being the only kid left in the house. My mother was rarely available when I called, and when she did answer, our exchanges were perfunctory. How are your grades? Are you eating properly? Don't forget to schedule your follow-up appointment with orthopedics during winter break. She existed in my life as an obligation to fulfill, nothing more. Vanessa called once, months into my first semester, to announce she was pregnant. She bubbled with excitement about nursery colors and baby names and how thrilled mother was to be becoming a grandmother. I made appropriate congratulatory noises while feeling absolutely nothing. Her life and mine had diverged so completely that we might as well have been strangers who happened to share DNA. Winter break came and I dreaded going home. The thought of returning to Portland, to that house where I'd been invisible, made my stomach clench. I manufactured excuses about needing to stay on campus for a research opportunity, which wasn't entirely a lie. A professor had asked if I wanted to help with data analysis for a study on bone density in healing fractures. The irony wasn't lost on me. My father was disappointed but understanding. My mother's response when he told her came back to me through Marcus, who texted me late one night. Mom said if you're too busy with school to come home, she's too busy with work to worry about it. Classic Catherine Hayes, turning my absence into a competition she could win by caring less. I spent winter break in a nearly empty dorm, working on the research project and exploring San Francisco when I needed a change of scenery. I went to museums and bookstores and coffee shops, anonymous among strangers, free from the weight of family expectations. It was the best holiday I'd had in years. The research project led to more opportunities. The professor was impressed with my work and invited me to continue into the spring semester. I started attending lab meetings, learning the rhythms of academic research, discovering I had an aptitude for seeing patterns in data that others missed. My leg injury gave me unique insight into the patient experience, a perspective that proved valuable when we were designing protocols. By sophomore year, I declared my major in bioengineering with a focus on orthopedic applications. The coursework intensified, labs eating up my evenings, problem sets consuming entire weekends. I barely had time to think about Portland or my family or anything beyond the immediate challenge of mastering biomechanics and materials science and tissue engineering. The workload was crushing, but it felt purposeful in a way nothing else ever had. I met James during a bioethics seminar required for all pre-med and engineering students. He was studying to be a surgeon, driven and ambitious in ways that reminded me uncomfortably of my mother. But where she was cold, he was warm. Where she dismissed emotions as inefficient, he believed empathy made better doctors. We fell into an easy friendship that became something more without either of us really noticing the transition. He knew about my leg, had noticed the limp but waited for me to bring it up. When I finally told him the story, all of it, the wedding and the accident and my mother's absence, he listened without trying to fix it or minimize it or make excuses for her. He just held my hand and said, "I'm sorry that happened to you," and somehow those simple words meant more than all of my father's attempts at explanation or Vanessa's shallow sympathy. We studied together in the library until security kicked us out at closing time. We got coffee at 2 in the morning when neither of us could face another practice problem. We dreamed aloud about the kind of doctors we wanted to become, the ways we wanted to change healthcare, the patients we hoped to help. With James, I could imagine a future where I wasn't defined by what had been done to me but by what I chose to do for others. Junior year brought new complications. My mother called, a rare enough occurrence that I almost didn't answer. She wanted to tell me that Mercy General was expanding, adding a new surgical wing, and she'd been promoted to chief of cardiology. She described the promotion with barely contained pride, the increased responsibilities, the larger team she'd be managing. "Congratulations," I said, because what else could I say? "Your father tells me you're doing well at Stanford. Research opportunities, good grades. I'm managing. Have you thought about medical school? You'd be competitive for top programs." I'm considering biomedical engineering graduate programs actually. Research and design rather than clinical practice. There was a pause, loaded with her disapproval. That seems like a waste of your potential. You have the grades for medical school. You could actually help people instead of just building devices. Her words landed like a slap. Actually help people. As if engineering solutions to improve lives was somehow less valuable than her precious surgery. As if my path was worthless because it diverged from hers. I'm going to help people in my own way, I said, my voice tight. Not everyone needs to follow your blueprint for success. Don't be defensive, Victoria. I'm simply pointing out that you have options. Closing doors before you've fully explored them seems short-sighted. Like you explored the option of being present for your daughter's surgery? The words were out before I could stop them, sharp and aimed to wound. The silence on the line stretched so long I thought she'd hung up. Then her voice came back, cold and clinical. I see we're still dwelling on ancient history. I thought you were past this adolescent resentment. It's not ancient history when the wound never healed, Mother. You never apologized. You never even acknowledged that what you did hurt me. You just kept acting like your choice was the only logical one and I was unreasonable for being devastated by it. I made the choice I had to make. I stand by it. If you can't accept that, that's your issue to work through with a therapist, not mine to apologize for. And there it was, the fundamental disconnect between us. She genuinely believed she'd done nothing wrong, that her decision had been purely rational and therefore unassailable. My feelings about it were an inconvenience, a character flaw I needed to overcome rather than a legitimate response to parental abandonment. I have to go, I said. I have class. Victoria, I hung up before she could finish. My hands were shaking, my chest tight with a fury I thought I'd moved past. James found me 20 minutes later sitting on a bench outside the engineering building, staring at nothing. She called, he said. It wasn't a question. He'd learned to read the specific quality of my anger, could tell the difference between stress from classes and stress from family. I nodded, not trusting my voice yet. He sat beside me, close enough that our shoulders touched. You know you don't owe her anything, right? Not forgiveness, not understanding, not access to your life. You get to protect yourself. His words echoed Dr. Park's from years ago, about being strategic with my energy, about choosing what to carry and what to release. But some weights didn't get lighter just because you knew you should put them down. Some wounds didn't heal just because you understood the infection. I want to prove her wrong, I admitted. I want to be so successful that she has to acknowledge I didn't need her path. That I built something worthwhile without her approval or her presence. James was quiet for a moment. Then he said, carefully, what if proving her wrong isn't enough? What if the thing you're really after is making her regret what she lost by not being there for you? I turned to look at him, startled by his insight. Maybe, I said slowly. Maybe that's exactly what I want. He nodded, understanding. Just make sure that when you get there, when you've built everything you're trying to build, that it's actually for you. Not just revenge dressed up as achievement. His words stayed with me through the rest of junior year and into senior year. I threw myself into my thesis project, designing an adaptive joint implant that could adjust to a patient's changing needs over time, reducing the number of revision surgeries required. The work was intricate, demanding, exactly the kind of challenge that made me forget to eat or sleep or do anything beyond iterate and test and improve. My advisor praised the innovation. Medical device companies started reaching out about potential patents and development partnerships. I presented at conferences, my limp no longer a source of shame but a testament to why this work mattered, why someone who'd lived through the limitations of current orthopedic solutions was uniquely positioned to design better ones. Graduate school acceptances arrived with generous funding packages. MIT wanted me for their bioengineering program. Johns Hopkins offered a prestigious fellowship. Stanford wanted me to stay, to continue the work I'd started as an undergraduate. I had choices, real choices, built on merit and potential rather than obligation or expectation. I called my father to tell him, and I could hear the pride vibrating through the phone. He told Marcus, who whooped so loudly I could hear it in the background. He told Vanessa, who said something vague about how impressive it all was while her toddler screamed in the background. And then, because I knew I should, I asked if he was going to tell Mother. He hesitated. "Do you want me to?" I thought about it, really thought about it. Part of me wanted her to know, wanted to shove my success in her face and force her to see what I'd accomplished without her support. But another part, the part that was slowly learning to protect itself, didn't want to give her the opportunity to diminish it, to find the flaws, to suggest I could have done better if only I'd listened to her. "Tell her if you want," I said finally. "But I'm not calling her myself." I accepted MIT's offer. It was far from California and even farther from Portland, a clear message that I was building a life in my own direction. The program was grueling, the expectations astronomical, but I'd spent years training myself to turn pain into productivity, to channel every hurt and disappointment into forward momentum. My thesis advisor at MIT was brilliant and demanding, pushing me to think bigger, to consider not just the technical aspects of medical devices but their economic and social implications. Who benefited from current healthcare systems? Who was left behind? How could engineering solutions address not just medical problems but systemic inequities? The questions transformed my perspective. I started seeing the healthcare industry not just as a place to build better devices but as a system in need of complete restructuring. The hospitals that held all the power. The insurance companies that decided whose suffering deserved treatment. The patients trapped in the middle, their lives and deaths determined by administrators in boardrooms who'd never felt real pain. I thought about my mother, working within that system, believing she was helping people while upholding structures that hurt as many as they healed. I thought about the patients from the highway accident she'd prioritized over me. Had they been able to afford their care? Or had their lives been saved only to be destroyed by medical debt? Had my mother even thought about the economics of her heroism? These questions drove me deeper into understanding not just the technical side of biomedical engineering but the business side. I took extra courses in healthcare economics, in policy, in healthcare systems management. I started attending conferences about healthcare innovation and disruption. I met entrepreneurs trying to build better models, administrators trying to reform from within, patients turned advocates who refused to accept that suffering was inevitable. And slowly, an idea began forming. Not just better devices or better treatments, but better systems. What if hospitals could be run differently? What if the incentive structures rewarded patient outcomes over procedure volume? What if the people making decisions about care actually understood what it felt like to be vulnerable, to be at the mercy of strangers who might choose their own convenience over your survival? I spent my second year at MIT developing not just medical technology but a business model, a framework for how a hospital could operate with radically different priorities. My advisor thought I was crazy, spreading myself too thin, trying to solve problems beyond the scope of engineering. But I couldn't stop seeing it, couldn't stop imagining a version of Mercy General where a teenager with a shattered leg would never be left alone because her mother had better things to do. The work consumed me. I graduated with my master's degree and immediately enrolled in a joint MD-MBA program, refusing to choose between understanding medicine, engineering, and business when I needed all three to build what I was imagining. James had moved to Boston for his residency, and we navigated the chaos of our respective programs together, stealing moments between his hospital shifts and my endless coursework. Years blurred into each other, marked by exams and publications and presentations. I went home for Christmas only once during that time, a disastrous visit where my mother criticized every choice I'd made and I left early, unwilling to subject myself to her disapproval disguised as concern. After that, I sent gifts and called my father and Marcus but avoided Portland like it might infect me with old wounds I'd worked too hard to scab over. Vanessa had another child. My father retired from his firm. Marcus started college on the East Coast, closer to me than them, which felt like its own kind of victory. And through it all, my mother kept climbing, kept achieving, kept being Dr. Catherine Hayes, the brilliant cardiologist everyone admired, the woman who'd sacrificed everything for her career including, apparently, any real relationship with her daughter. I told myself I didn't care. Told myself I'd moved past needing her approval or her presence. Told myself the life I was building was enough, that the work I was doing mattered more than any family reconciliation. And most days, I believed it. But some nights, when my leg ached and the memories came flooding back unbidden, I remembered being 16 and terrified and calling for my mother who never came. I remembered the taste of that abandonment, metallic and bitter, coating my tongue like medicine I'd been forced to swallow. And I knew that no amount of success, no number of degrees or publications or innovations, would ever fully erase the girl who'd learned she wasn't worth her mother's time. That girl lived inside me still, driving me forward, demanding I prove to the world and maybe to myself that I'd survived being disposable. She was the fuel in my engine, the fire in my belly, the voice whispering that one day, somehow, I would make Catherine Hayes see exactly what she'd lost when she chose a room full of strangers over her own daughter bleeding on a gurney. I just didn't know yet how spectacular that reckoning would be. The call came on a Tuesday morning while I was reviewing financial projections in my cramped apartment near Boston General. 10 years had passed since the accident, and I'd built something extraordinary from the wreckage. My medical device patents had sold for enough money to fund the next phase of my vision. The joint degree had opened doors I hadn't known existed. And now, at 26, I stood on the edge of something that would either revolutionize healthcare or destroy me trying. My phone screen showed an unknown Portland number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me swipe to accept. Is this Victoria Hayes? The voice was professionally neutral, neither warm nor cold. Speaking. This is Gerald Whitmore from Cascade Investment Group. We've been following your work in adaptive orthopedic implants and your published papers on healthcare system reform. I wonder if you might have time to discuss a potential opportunity. I set down my pen, attention fully captured. I'm listening. Mercy General Hospital is facing significant financial difficulties. Mismanagement, declining patient satisfaction scores, several high-profile malpractice suits. The board is looking for outside investors willing to purchase a controlling stake and implement comprehensive restructuring. Your name came up in our research as someone uniquely positioned to understand both the medical and business challenges involved. My heart stopped, then restarted at double speed. Mercy General. The hospital where my mother worked. The hospital where I'd been brought after the accident, where she'd chosen other patients over me, where everything had fractured beyond repair. And now someone was offering me the chance to own it. Why me specifically? I asked, keeping my voice steady despite the adrenaline flooding my system. Whitmore launched into an explanation of my qualifications, my patents, my dual expertise, my published critiques of traditional hospital management structures. But I barely heard him. My mind was already racing ahead, calculating possibilities, seeing the shape of something I'd been building toward without fully realizing it. I'd need to review the financial records, I said. Conduct due diligence on operations, staffing, patient outcomes. This isn't a decision I'd make lightly. Of course. I'll have our team compile a comprehensive information packet. But I should mention, time is somewhat of a factor. There are other interested parties, though none with your particular background. The board is looking to make a decision within 60 days. After we hung up, I sat in the silence of my apartment and felt the weight of cosmic irony settling over me. The universe had just handed me the keys to my mother's kingdom. Not metaphorically, not eventually, but actually and immediately. I could own the hospital where she'd built her entire identity. I could become her boss. I could restructure the place according to my vision of what healthcare should be. I could make her see me. James came home from his shift to find me surrounded by papers, my laptop open to Mercy General's financial statements that Whitmore's team had sent over. He took one look at my face and knew something seismic had happened. "Tell me," he said, sinking onto the couch beside me. I told him everything. The call, the opportunity, the hospital, the connection to my mother. He listened without interrupting, his expression shifting from surprise to concern to something that looked almost like fear. "This is about revenge," he said when I finished. "You know that, right? It's about building something better. Taking a broken system and fixing it properly. Creating the kind of hospital where what happened to me couldn't happen to anyone else. And the fact that it's your mother's hospital, that's just coincidence." I met his eyes. "No. It's justice. He was quiet for a long moment. Tori, I love you. You know I do. But I'm worried this is going to destroy you. Not the work of running a hospital, you're capable of that. But the emotional cost of being that close to your mother again, of having this power dynamic, of trying to make her pay for something she still doesn't think she did wrong. Maybe she needs to pay for it, I said. Maybe that's the only way any of this makes sense. Or maybe you need to let it go. He reached for my hand. You've built an incredible life without her. You've proven everything you set out to prove. This, going back to Portland, buying her hospital, it's walking backward into old pain instead of forward into new possibility. His words echoed my own doubts, the voice in my head that said this was a terrible idea, that some wounds were better left alone. But another voice, louder and angrier, demanded I take this chance. How many people got the opportunity to rewrite their origin story? How many victims got to become the powerful one? I need to at least explore it, I told James. Look at the numbers, understand the operation, see if it's even viable. I'm not committing to anything yet. But we both knew I was lying. The moment Whitmore said Mercy General, I'd already made my decision. Everything else was just justification for what my wounded 16-year-old self demanded I do. The due diligence took 3 weeks. I flew to Portland under the radar, staying in hotels under my married name, James having proposed 6 months earlier with a ring that had belonged to his grandmother. I toured Mercy General with Whitmore and the board members, seeing the hospital through new eyes. The aging infrastructure, the inefficient workflows, the staff who moved with the exhaustion of people drowning in bureaucracy. I requested employee satisfaction surveys, patient outcome data, financial records going back 5 years. The picture they painted was grim. Mercy General was bleeding money and talent, circling the drain while administrators argued about deck chairs on the Titanic. The cardiology department under my mother's leadership was one of the few bright spots, which somehow made everything worse. She was thriving while the institution around her crumbled. I met with department heads, nurses, support staff, asking questions that revealed how little the current administration understood about actual patient care. They talked about efficiency metrics and cost-cutting measures that translated to fewer nurses per patient, longer wait times, corners cut in ways that endangered lives. The more I learned, the more convinced I became that this place needed to be torn down and rebuilt from the foundation up. My mother and I didn't cross paths during those 3 weeks. I timed my visits carefully, checking her surgery schedule, avoiding the cardiology wing. I told myself it was strategy, keeping the element of surprise. But truthfully, I wasn't ready to face her yet. Not as a potential investor reviewing her workplace. Not before I held the power to change everything. The financial investment required was substantial, more than I had from my patents alone. I needed partners, venture capital backing, loans leveraged against future earnings. I spent 14-hour days in meetings with investors, pitching my vision of what Mercy General could become. A teaching hospital focused on innovation and patient outcomes rather than billing volume. A place where cutting-edge technology met compassionate care, where the business model incentivized healing rather than procedures. Some investors laughed me out of their offices. Healthcare reform was a pipe dream, they said. The system was too entrenched, too profitable for those at the top, too broken to fix from within. But others saw what I saw, the massive inefficiencies, the wasted potential, the opportunity to disrupt an industry ripe for change. Slowly, I assembled the backing I needed. James grew quieter as the deal progressed. He supported me publicly, but I could feel his doubt radiating in our private moments. He thought I was making a mistake, choosing revenge over healing, but he loved me enough not to force the ultimatum I knew was coming. We'd have to address it eventually, what it meant that I was willing to uproot our life in Boston, to move back to the city I'd fled, all to prove something to a woman who probably wouldn't care anyway. The final negotiations happened in a conference room with windows overlooking downtown Portland. I sat across from the hospital board, their lawyers flanking them like guards. Whitmore presented the terms. I would acquire a 51% controlling stake in Mercy General Hospital, with the option to buy out remaining shares over the next 3 years. I would assume the position of CEO, with full authority over operations, staffing, and strategic direction. The current administration would be dissolved, their contracts terminated with generous severance packages. The board members looked at me with barely concealed skepticism. I was young, female, an outsider despite my credentials. They wanted assurance I understood the complexity of hospital administration, the regulatory environment, the political landscape. I walked them through my restructuring plan, the operational changes I'd implement in the first 90 days, the financial projections showing a return to profitability within 18 months. One board member, an older man with silver hair and a condescending smile, leaned forward. "And what about the medical staff? Surely you're not planning to replace our physicians? Some of them have been with Mercy General for decades. They won't take kindly to an outsider telling them how to practice medicine." "I'm not planning to tell anyone how to practice medicine," I replied evenly. "I'm planning to create systems that support excellent medicine instead of impeding it. Physicians who are committed to patient care will thrive under the new structure. Those who are more interested in protecting their fiefdoms than serving patients might find the culture shift uncomfortable." The chairman cleared his throat. "I assume you're aware that Dr. Catherine Hayes, our chief of cardiology, is one of those long-standing physicians. Highly respected, significant influence both within the hospital and in the broader medical community. Will she be staying on?" The room went silent. Everyone looked at me, waiting to see if I'd reveal the connection, if I'd show my hand. I kept my expression neutral, professional. "Every position will be evaluated based on performance metrics, patient outcomes, and alignment with the hospital's new mission and values. Dr. Hayes will have the same opportunity as any other department head to demonstrate she belongs in the new structure." It was a politician's answer, technically true but fundamentally evasive. The chairman nodded slowly, and I could see him filing away my careful neutrality for future consideration. But he didn't push further. The deal was too good, the hospital too desperate, my credentials too strong for them to reject the offer over questions about one employee, even one as prominent as my mother. We signed the papers 3 days later. The announcement would go out the following week, giving me time to assemble my leadership team before the news broke. I hired a chief operating officer from Johns Hopkins, someone who shared my vision for systemic reform. I recruited a chief nursing officer known for her advocacy of better staffing ratios. I brought in a chief financial officer who understood that healthcare economics required different metrics than traditional business. And then I prepared to tell my family. My father was first. I called him on a Sunday morning, knowing my mother would already be at the hospital for her weekend rounds. He answered on the third ring, surprised to hear from me in the middle of the day. "Tori, is everything all right?" "I'm fine, Dad. Actually, I'm better than fine. I have some news." I told him about the acquisition, watching through FaceTime as his expression shifted from confusion to shock to something that might have been pride or might have been worry. He asked the obvious questions. Why Portland? Why Mercy General? Did I understand what I was taking on? And did your mother know about this? He asked finally. Not yet. I wanted to tell you first. But she'll find out officially next week when the announcement goes out to all staff. He was quiet for a long moment. This is about the accident, isn't it? About what happened that night. It's about a lot of things, I said. But yes, that's part of it. Tori, I understand you're still angry. I understand she hurt you deeply. But are you sure this is the right way to address it? Coming back as her boss, having power over her career, it feels like it could do more harm than good for both of you. Maybe it's time she experienced what it feels like to be powerless, I said. To have someone else making decisions about her life without caring about her feelings. 2 wrongs don't make a right, sweetheart. I'm not trying to make a wrong, Dad. I'm trying to build something right. A hospital that actually serves patients instead of exploiting them. A system where what happened to me couldn't happen to anyone else. If that makes my mother uncomfortable along the way, maybe she should have thought about that 16 years ago. He sighed, the sound heavy with resignation. When do you move back to Portland? 2 weeks. James is transferring his residency to Oregon Health Sciences. We found a place in the Pearl District. Does your mother know about James? I realized with a start that she didn't. I'd never told her about my relationship, my engagement, my plans to marry. She'd been so absent from my life that I'd stopped including her in any of it. She probably didn't even know I'd finished my joint degree program or that my patents had sold or that I'd become someone with the capital and credentials to buy a hospital. She'll find out, I said. After I hung up with my father, I sat in the growing darkness of the Boston apartment I'd soon be leaving and thought about what I was about to do. James was right that this was about revenge, at least partially. But it was also about something bigger, something that had been building since I'd lain in a hospital bed at 16 and realized my mother had chosen wrong. The healthcare system was broken. Hospitals prioritized profits over people, administrators made decisions divorced from patient reality, and physicians got so caught up in their own importance that they forgot what they were supposed to be serving. My mother embodied everything wrong with that system, the arrogance and detachment, the belief that clinical excellence excused emotional failure. I was going back to Portland to break that system and rebuild it better. If my mother got caught in the demolition, if she had to face the daughter she dismissed and overlooked now holding authority over her professional life, well, perhaps that was the justice the universe had been building toward all along. The announcement hit Mercy General like a bomb. I watched from my new office, screens showing news coverage, social media reactions, the hospital grapevine working overtime. Young CEO takes over struggling hospital with radical reform plans. Healthcare innovator promises to revolutionize patient care. Questions swirl about new leadership's lack of traditional hospital management experience. My mother heard about it from a colleague before the official email reached her inbox. I knew because my father called me, his voice tight with stress. She knows, he said. She just called me from the hospital. She's furious, Tori. Absolutely furious. Good, I replied. That's your response? Good. She's your mother, regardless of everything else. And I'm her daughter, regardless of everything else. She made her priorities clear 16 years ago. Now she gets to live with mine. The first department head meeting was scheduled for Wednesday morning, mandatory attendance for all senior medical staff. I prepared for it the way generals prepare for battle, knowing my mother would be there, knowing this would be our first face-to-face encounter in over a decade, knowing everything would change in that room. I wore a suit in charcoal gray, expensive but not flashy, paired with heels that added 3 inches to my height. My leg ached from the stress, but I'd learned long ago not to show weakness, to move through pain with my head high. James kissed me before I left our new apartment, his hands on my shoulders, his eyes worried. Don't lose yourself in this, he whispered. Remember who you are beyond the anger. I'm not angry, I lied. I'm focused. The boardroom was on the hospital's top floor, windows overlooking the city I'd grown up in and fled from and was now returning to conquer. Department heads filed in, their expressions ranging from curious to hostile. They'd heard about the new CEO, the outsider with her radical ideas, but most of them hadn't met me yet, hadn't seen my face or heard my voice or understood that I wasn't some corporate raider looking to strip assets. I was something far more dangerous, a true believer who'd been broken by their system and learned how to break it back. My mother was the last to arrive. She walked in with the confidence of someone who'd owned rooms like this for decades, her white coat pristine, her hair perfectly styled, her face composed. Our eyes met across the table and I saw the moment recognition hit her. She froze mid-step, her hand still on the door handle, every ounce of color draining from her face. For 10 seconds, we just stared at each other. I watched her take in my professional attire, my position at the head of the table, the nameplate reading Victoria Hayes, CEO. I watched the calculations happening behind her eyes, the realization of what this meant, the understanding that her daughter, the one she'd dismissed and overlooked, now controlled her professional destiny. She recovered quickly, I'd give her that. Her face smoothed back into professional neutrality and she took her seat at the far end of the table, as physically distant from me as the room allowed. But her hands trembled slightly as she set down her coffee cup, and I knew that beneath the composed surface, she was panicking. I let the silence build for one more beat, making sure everyone was settled, making sure all eyes were on me. Then I began. Good morning. For those who don't know me, I'm Dr. Victoria Hayes, and as of last week, I'm the new CEO of Mercy General Hospital. I have a doctorate in biomedical engineering from MIT and an MD and MBA from the Joint Program at Harvard. Before this role, I developed and patented 3 adaptive orthopedic implants currently in use at major hospitals across the country, and I've published extensively on healthcare system reform and patient-centered care models. I paused, letting my credentials settle over the room. Several people looked impressed. Others looked skeptical. My mother's face remained carefully blank. I'm here because Mercy General is failing. Your patient satisfaction scores are in the bottom quartile nationally. Your financial performance has declined for 3 consecutive years. Staff turnover is at historic highs. And most importantly, you're not serving your patients effectively. This ends now. Someone started to object, but I raised a hand, cutting them off. I'm not interested in hearing defenses of the status quo or explanations about why things can't change. I've spent 3 weeks reviewing every department, every process, every metric. I know exactly where the problems are and I have detailed plans to fix them. Over the next 90 days, we're going to implement radical changes to how this hospital operates. Some of you will embrace this transformation. Some of you won't. Those who can't or won't adapt to the new culture will be asked to find positions elsewhere. The room erupted in murmurs, people shifting uncomfortably, exchanging glances. My mother remained still, her eyes fixed on me with an intensity that would have intimidated me once. Now it just felt like validation. I spent the next hour outlining the restructuring plan. New protocols for patient communication. Revised staffing ratios prioritizing care over cost cutting. Technology implementations to reduce administrative burden on clinical staff. A comprehensive review of every department's performance metrics and outcomes. I was thorough, detailed, leaving no room for confusion about my expectations or my willingness to make hard decisions. When I finished, I opened the floor for questions. Hands went up around the table. Concerns about timeline, about resources, about how changes would be implemented. I answered each one with precision, demonstrating that I'd thought through every angle, anticipated every objection. My mother raised her hand last. I felt my pulse quicken but kept my expression neutral. Yes, Dr. Hayes. The formality of it hung in the air. Everyone in the room could sense something beneath the surface, but no one except us knew what. You mentioned a comprehensive review of departmental performance, she said, her voice steady. What specific metrics will be used for evaluation? And who will be conducting these reviews? Performance will be evaluated based on patient outcomes, not just procedure volume. We'll look at complication rates, readmission rates, patient satisfaction scores, and team collaboration metrics. Reviews will be conducted by external consultants to ensure objectivity, with final recommendations coming to me for approval. And existing department heads? Will we all be subject to this review? I held her gaze. Everyone will be subject to review, Dr. Hayes. No exceptions. Excellence will be rewarded. Mediocrity will be addressed. Failure to align with our new patient-centered mission will result in restructuring of leadership positions as needed. The challenge was clear in her eyes. She was asking if I'd really fire my own mother, if I had the steel to follow through on my threats when they became personal. I was answering that yes, absolutely, without hesitation or remorse. The meeting ended shortly after. People filed out in clusters, whispering to each other, processing what they'd just heard. My mother remained seated until the room cleared, and then she stood and walked toward me with measured steps. We were alone for the first time in 16 years, face to face across a boardroom table that might as well have been a chasm. Victoria, she said, and I heard the strain in her voice despite her attempts to hide it. I had no idea you were involved in this acquisition. If I'd known, if you'd known, what? Would you have tried to block it? Called in favors to prevent the sale? Her jaw tightened. I would have reached out. We could have discussed this like adults instead of you ambushing me in front of my colleagues. Adults. The word was almost funny. You want to talk about being adults? About respect and communication? Where was that 16 years ago when I was in surgery and you couldn't be bothered to check on your own daughter? Her face went rigid. I see we're going to do this now. Fine. Yes, I made a choice that night. A choice to save lives that were actively in crisis instead of standing beside a surgery where you were already being competently cared for. I don't apologize for that choice and I never will. I didn't expect you to apologize, Mother. I stopped expecting anything from you a long time ago. But now you're going to experience what it's like to have someone prioritize their own agenda over your needs. To be just another name on a list of people who don't matter as much as the work. I wonder how you'll like it. She stared at me, and for the first time I saw something crack in her composure. Fear, maybe, or recognition of the trap she'd walked into. Her daughter had become her boss, and there was nothing she could do about it except endure or quit. This is revenge, she said quietly. You bought this hospital to punish me. I bought this hospital to fix it, I corrected. The fact that fixing it requires breaking down systems and people who've been operating wrong for decades, well, that's just good business. If you're uncomfortable with the changes, Dr. Hayes, perhaps you should consider whether Mercy General is still the right fit for your career goals. I walked past her toward the door, my limp barely noticeable despite the stress radiating through my leg. At the threshold, I paused and looked back. Oh, and Mother? That external review I mentioned? It starts with cardiology. I'll expect your department's complete records on my desk by end of week. I left her standing there, alone in that boardroom, finally understanding that her daughter had survived being overlooked. Had thrived despite being abandoned. Had grown powerful enough to make her feel exactly what she'd made a 16-year-old girl feel in a hospital room with no one coming to hold her hand. The war had begun, and I intended to win. The external review came back 3 months later, and the findings were damning in ways I hadn't anticipated. My mother's cardiology department had excellent surgical outcomes, nobody could dispute her technical skill. But the patient complaints told a different story. Families described her as cold, dismissive, unwilling to explain procedures in terms they could understand. Nurses reported she berated staff in front of patients, created a culture of fear that led to mistakes being hidden rather than addressed. Her brilliance had come at a human cost nobody had dared to measure until now. I sat in my office reviewing the report, feeling the weight of what I'd set in motion. This wasn't just about our personal history anymore. Real problems existed that affected real people, and I had a responsibility to address them regardless of who was involved. James found me there late that evening, the city lights of Portland glowing through the windows. You've been staring at that report for 3 hours, he said gently. What are you going to do? What I have to do. She needs additional training in patient communication and team management. Mandatory coaching with regular progress evaluations. If she refuses or fails to improve, she'll be demoted from department head. He sat on the edge of my desk. That's fair. That's professional. So why do you look so conflicted? Because part of me wants her to fail, I admitted. Part of me wants an excuse to take everything from her the way she took everything from me. And I hate that part of myself. James took my hand. The fact that you recognize that impulse means you won't act on it. You're better than your worst instincts, Tori. You always have been. The meeting where I presented my mother with the review findings was brief and brutal. I kept my tone professional, clinical even, outlining the specific areas requiring improvement and the timeline for reassessment. She sat across from me, her face a mask of barely controlled fury, and listened without interrupting. This is personal, she said when I finished. You're using your position to humiliate me. This is about patient care, I replied. If you can't separate your ego from that reality, maybe you're not suited for leadership at this hospital. She stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. You've made your point, Victoria. You have power now. You can make me uncomfortable, make me jump through hoops, prove that you've risen above the daughter who needed me. Congratulations. Does it feel as satisfying as you imagined? Her words struck deeper than I expected. I'd spent 16 years building toward this moment, imagining her discomfort, her recognition of what she'd lost. But sitting there with the power to destroy her career, I felt hollow rather than triumphant. Revenge, it turned out, tasted like nothing at all. My father called that night asking me to come to dinner, just family, to try to bridge the gaps that had grown so wide. I almost said no. But something in his voice, a weariness I'd never heard before, made me agree. Marcus would be there, home from college for the weekend. Even Vanessa promised to show up without Derek and the kids. Just us, trying to remember how to be something resembling a family. The dinner was awkward, conversations stilted and careful. We talked about Marcus's classes, about Vanessa's promotion at her firm, about the renovations my parents were planning for the house. Nobody mentioned the hospital or the review or the tension crackling between my mother and me like a live wire. We were all performing normalcy, pretending the foundation wasn't cracked beyond repair. Dessert arrived and my mother set down her fork with deliberate precision. She looked at me directly for the first time all evening. "I've enrolled in the communication training you mandated," she said. "I've started working with the coach. I don't agree with your assessment, but I'm complying with the requirements." "Good," I replied, matching her formal tone. "But I want you to understand something." She paused, seeming to gather herself. "What happened after your accident, my choice to stay in the emergency room, I made that decision based on the information I had at the time. People were dying. You were stable. In my position, with my training, with the resources available, I made the call I thought was right. You keep saying that like it justifies abandoning your child." Her hands clenched in her lap. "I didn't abandon you. I made a professional decision in an impossible situation. I didn't do it to hurt you. I did it because it was what I believed needed to be done. And you never once considered that you could be wrong? That maybe sometimes being a mother should matter more than being a doctor?" She looked away, her jaw working. "I spent my entire career fighting to be taken seriously in a male-dominated field. To prove I was just as capable, just as committed, just as willing to make hard choices. The moment I prioritized my daughter over my patients, would have confirmed every stereotype about women being too emotional for medicine. So I was collateral damage in your professional credibility," I said quietly. "That's what you're telling me?" The silence that followed felt vast. My father reached for my mother's hand but she pulled away. Marcus stared at his plate. Vanessa checked her phone, uncomfortable with emotional honesty as always. My mother stood, her napkin falling to the floor. "I can't do this. I can't keep apologizing for decisions I don't regret. You want me to say I was wrong, that I should have chosen differently, but I won't lie to make you feel better. I did what I had to do. If you can't accept that, then I don't know what else there is to say." She left the dining room, her footsteps echoing down the hallway. The front door opened and closed. My father followed her, always following her, leaving Marcus and me and Vanessa sitting in the wreckage of another failed attempt at reconciliation. I realized something in that moment. My mother would never give me what I needed. No amount of power over her career would force the apology I'd been chasing. She couldn't acknowledge the hurt she'd caused because doing so would require admitting vulnerability, admitting she'd chosen wrong, admitting she was human and fallible. Her identity was too wrapped up in being right, in being the dedicated physician who made the tough calls, to allow space for the possibility that tough calls could still be mistakes. 6 months into my tenure as CEO, Mercy General's numbers started turning around. Patient satisfaction scores climbed. Staff retention improved. The changes I'd implemented were working, not because they were revolutionary but because they were rooted in basic human decency, in treating patients and staff like people rather than metrics. My mother completed her mandatory training and her patient communication scores improved marginally. Not enough to be impressive, but enough to keep her position. We maintained our professional distance, speaking only when necessary, existing in parallel rather than together. James and I got married in a small ceremony in the hospital chapel, which felt appropriate given how much of my life had been shaped by this building. My father walked me down the aisle. Marcus stood as my man of honor. Vanessa came with her family. My mother sent a card but didn't attend, claiming a surgery she couldn't reschedule. I told myself I didn't care, and mostly I meant it. Dr. Park came to the wedding, this mentor who'd planted seeds of wisdom when I was 16 and broken. He hugged me afterward and said he was proud of who I'd become, not just professionally but as a person who'd turned pain into purpose without letting it poison her completely. Standing in that chapel, my leg aching as it always did but my heart somehow lighter than it had been in years, I understood that justice and revenge were different things. I'd gotten justice by building something better, by creating systems that protected vulnerable patients, by proving that hospitals could operate with both excellence and empathy. Revenge would have required destroying my mother, and that would have destroyed me too. She would never apologize. She would never admit she'd been wrong. And I had to accept that some wounds don't heal, they just become scars you learn to carry. The power I'd gained over her career hadn't fixed what was broken between us. Nothing could fix that except mutual recognition of harm done and harm felt, and she wasn't capable of that recognition. But I was capable of building a life that mattered beyond our dysfunction. A hospital that served patients the way I'd needed to be served. A marriage built on actual presence and support. A career that changed healthcare systems not through vengeance but through better models. That was enough. It had to be enough. I looked at my mother's empty seat during the reception and felt something release in my chest. Not forgiveness, exactly. Not reconciliation. But acceptance that she was who she was, and I was who I'd become despite her, and those two realities could exist without one destroying the other. The 16-year-old girl who'd called for her mother in that hospital room, she'd finally stopped waiting for someone who was never going to come. She'd learned to show up for herself instead. And in the end, that was the only power that mattered. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.